here with all of you. So I'm looking forward to our time together. And I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint. I have a PowerPoint with some slides to share. You either already got or will get a handout packet of email in the email, which will include a PDF of the PowerPoint as well as a few other articles and things that I wanted you to have as handouts to go with our session today. And when I do pull up the PowerPoint, I came on here to say hello, and so you could see that I'm a real person talking with you. But once I pull up the PowerPoint, I'm going to take my own camera off. I just find it makes the Zoom go a little smoother. It uses less bandwidth. And then at the end, when we do some Q&A at the very end, I'll bring my camera back on so I can wave to you again. But for now, you'll just see the actual PowerPoint. So let me get that pulled up. And let's see, here it is. And we're going to start it at the beginning. There we go. So hopefully now you are all able to see the PowerPoint. And if for any reason you're not, please put a note in the chat so we know that you're not. And this is where I'm going to go ahead and shut off my video, so you won't be seeing me anymore, but I'm still here. And like was mentioned earlier, please do go ahead and use the chat box as much as you like for any comments, questions. You'll also notice that I'm going to do some polling. I'm going to start with a poll right off here in just a moment. And I'm going to always, whenever I show the poll, I will also read it out loud. And therefore, if for any reason you can't see it on your screen, or you have a device that makes it challenging to answer poll questions, you can still at least hear it, so you won't be left out. And you can always write a response in the chat box if you can't navigate actually responding on the poll itself. So I like to acknowledge that although Zoom is challenging for training, I like to make it as interactive and engaging for you as possible. So we will do the couple of polls throughout the session. That's one way we'll make it engaging, hopefully. The other is the chat box. Don't just reserve that only for questions. Please feel free to put in a comment or reflection, anything that you would like to share related to anything that I'm talking about. There will be particular times when I'll ask you, do you have a thought about this or a reflection on that? And that you can then at that point also type it into your response into the chat box. So let's use both the polls and the chats as a way to connect and engage with one another. And then hopefully, if all goes well, I will have reserved a little bit of time at the end where we can have some additional Q&A. But don't wait for the end. Please, participate throughout. That makes it much more meaningful for all of us. So on that note, I'm going to start us off with our first polling question just to get a little sense of who is here. So I have just launched the poll. Hopefully you see it. And I'm going to read it. Like I said, you can respond directly on the poll or in the chat box, whichever easier for you. Also, just to let you know, when we do these polls, I only see the aggregated answers. I don't see who said what. So from your end of the thing, it's anonymous. So this one says, in my work, I primarily work directly with child or teen clients, work directly with adult clients, supervise staff, administer programs, or other. And if you're responding with other, which it looks like quite a good number of you seem to be, I would love it if you would type in the chat box kind of what some of the other is if you're not working with children, teens, adults, or staff or administration. Just give me an idea of what the other is, if you would, in the chat box so that I can know kind of who I'm talking to. And yeah, we've gotten about 3/4 of you have weighed in with a response. So I'm going to leave the poll up just for a few more seconds to see if we can get closer to all of you in on it. All right, and I see we have human resources, public relations, of course, community relations. Oh, growing a public library programming. Okay, so that's really cool. Yeah, so lots of great diversity of what people are doing. So it looks like the responses have slowed down coming in. We still have about a handful of people that didn't reply, but hopefully you're able to see and hear and just not replying to the poll, but that's okay. So we're going to take an end for the poll so you can see the results. So we do have a number, some range of diversity, people that work with children, teens, adults, supervise staff, administer programs. It's kind of not exactly even split, but a good split between all those categories. And then people who wrote some notes in the chat box about what some of the other means. So thank you for participating in that, and I'll try to keep that range in mind as we go through our topic today. Now, this topic is just so important for social service and community nonprofits like all of you represent, because we do know that burnout and secondary traumatic stress, both of which I'll be talking about. I will define them both, but kind of they intertwine a little bit. That burnout and STS are definitely a higher risk for people in the nonprofit sector and especially in the social service sector than many other kinds of professions. It's because of that daily or frequent contact with children and adults who are experiencing traumatic life circumstances, and you're just having that constant exposure. Also, oftentimes people in the nonprofit sector even experience threats against themselves in this work, or find themselves in vulnerable or risky situations to do their work. So for all of these reasons, this is a really important topic, even if it wasn't coming on the heels of a whole year of being in pandemic mode. The pandemic certainly adds another layer to all of that. Now, just to give, for example, one profession of child welfare, studies have shown that at least a third of people who practice in that field meet the actual clinical uh, standard for a diagnosis of PTSD, and 92% have at least one of the symptoms for secondary traumatic stress and PTSD. So that's just in one of the professions that is often represented by the nonprofit sector and social service agencies such as those that many of you represent, just to give an idea of how prevalent this is. And those kind of statistics affect turnover, absenteeism, morale, and even capacity to have good judgment and get good outcomes in terms of the work. So that's really why this topic is really important, and why I'm really glad that you took time out of your day, your lunchtime, I believe, to be here with me today. So what we're going to cover in our hour that we're together. Obviously, it's only an hour, so it won't be real deep on any of these topics. But we're gonna cover some aspect of each of these topics about recognizing employee burnout, helping work towards a goal of resilience and post-traumatic growth within our organizations. I'm going to introduce a few tools that will help you measure and manage burnout, and some tips and tools around managing your own self-care needs and stress levels so that you can then do that with your staff as well, and some concepts related to appreciative inquiry and reflective supervision as a way of ongoing management that helps reduce or prevent burnout among our staff. So these are the things we're going to try to focus on in the time we have together. Now, hopefully, at least some, if not all of you, were part of the training I did last year around this time on grief, loss, and self-care during the pandemic. If you were, you'll notice then that today's session does, to some degree, build on some of the concepts that I did talk about that day. Now, if you weren't on it, it's okay. This is completely intended as a standalone webinar as well. But if you did participate in that, you'll see the links. You'll see how I built on it. You'll see occasionally a repeated concept to kind of weave the two together. So just wanted to mention that. Now, one of the things that we're going to do throughout this time that we're together today is what I call circle times. Now, we're going to do a very, very short-circuited, brief version of these, 30 seconds each time. I think there's up to 4 of them throughout the webinar, and each one will last 30 seconds. So it's not like doing a whole circle time in your office with all your staff, but this is one tool that you can use within your workplace for your own self-care, but also for your employees, and to help create an environment that reduces the likelihood of burnout. So we're going to do these, and each time we come to one of these circles, there's a topic on it. As you can see, this one is about something you're thankful for, have gratitude about. Now, each of the topics that I've selected for these 4 circles, there's a research base, an evidence base, that doing this kind of reflection actually increases resilience. And that's what we're shooting for. That's how we overcome burnout, is by increasing resilience. So these have an evidence base that if you do these reflective things, you actually do get to increase resilience among your staff as well as for yourself. So each time I come to one of these circles, what I'm going to do is pause for a full 30 seconds. You won't hear me, I won't be speaking. And during that 30 seconds, I would ask you, to the extent that you're willing and able, and no one can see you, so you're at your own spot, your own desk, or wherever you're checking in from, but to just pause for that 30 seconds, to be intentional about your breathing. So take some slower, deeper breaths than maybe you are the rest of the time. And just focus on the topic that's on the slide. So this first one, something you're thankful about. And if you're willing and able, just go ahead and even close your eyes while you do that. So it's just 30 seconds, possibly with your eyes closed, taking some intentional breaths and just focusing your mind on the topic here about thankfulness and different topics on the ones ahead. So I'll say when the 30 seconds will start, and then I'll say we're back when it's over. At the end of the 30 seconds, if you did have a reflection you wanted to share about that experience or about that topic, feel free to type it in the chat box, and then we'll go ahead and move on. So the 30 seconds will start now. And take one last breath, and that's the end of our 30-second thankfulness circle. And I appreciate that we've already had a comment. Now, this comment that was made came only to me, well, and to the other panelists. If you want your comment to go to the whole audience, you have to click on the drop-down box, panelists and attendees. Either way is fine. But does anyone else have any reflection? One person reflected they're thankful for being healthy. Any other reflections either on what you're thankful for or just that experience of taking a 30-second pause to be intentional about your breathing and to focus on gratitude? If there's any reflections on that, love to see you make some notes. If not, we'll move on. Feeling more relaxed. Yeah, it's amazing. 30 seconds when I announce it doesn't sound like a long period of time, but even a 30-second break can really have a benefit. And especially if you do those periodically throughout the day and you encourage your staff to do them. So, of course, there's bigger things that are needed in our workplaces, in our communities to uh, prevent and manage burnout. But this is there are also some small and simple things that can make a tremendous difference. I'm not seeing any other comments at this time, so I think we'll go forward. Yeah, so there's a nice comment there about being thankful the pandemic has led us to be aware of and think about these things more. So that a silver lining, and we can find some of those kinds of things in our life and in our world. Feel free to keep adding comments, but I will take us forward now. So the World Health Organization officially recognized job-related burnout as a mental health concern in 2019, before the pandemic even came along. So as of 2019, there was a lot of research, there was a lot of writing about the impact of job-related burnout, especially in certain professions. And as I said, the ones you all represent are high on that list. Millennial generation, the so-called sandwich generation of people that have both children and elderly parents to care for, are at particular risk. You'll also see in a moment a couple of other facts about that. But so even before the pandemic hit, we had this recognition by the World Health Organization that it is a specific mental health concern. And now, during this past year, some people that have been looking more closely at it say that 40% of workers across all professions are reporting that they've specifically experienced burnout during the pandemic. So that's a big percentage just in this past year. And then another critical data point, burnout is experienced at a much higher level of frequency. It's often experienced much more intensely and deeply felt. And support for the factors leading to burnout or for going through it or sort of recovery from it are less available for women in the workforce and women who manage both sort of that work-life experience of being at home and at work, and for people of color. And there's been a good amount written about the experience, especially for people of color in the past year. I included one article about that in your handout packet, just a really short, easy article to read, but there are many others that you can find if you're interested to look this up. Now, burnout often comes when there's a steady stream of frequent or continuous stress factors. And it's the frequent or continuous nature of these stress factors. Some have described it as feeling like a bombardment that leads to not only burnout, but secondary traumatic stress, which I'll often refer to in this webinar as STS. And so the current situation with worldwide pandemic and heightened awareness and visibility and action related to historic and current racism and tension, these have definitely increased the likelihood of burnout and STS symptoms in people in all life circumstances, all walks of life, all professions, but again, particularly in many of the professions we represent here today. So this increases stress, anxiety, any pre-existing and ongoing trauma triggers. People who have those situations are even more vulnerable. Microaggressions, sexism and racism in the culture as well as in the workplace definitely add to the weight and the burden of these conditions that lead to burnout. So that's why, again, part of why it's so important that we think about this. Now, the next piece of what I'm going to do, and I have to share my sound. Oh, it's already there. Okay, good. The next piece of what I'm going to do is to share a couple of very brief clips from two videos. And they both have to do with a tree or trees in a storm situation. And so I would like you to look at the two clips of videos. Hopefully you can hear them, but the sound is really less important than just kind of observing what's happening with the trees. So all I want you to really zoom in on and focus on is the trees in these storms, clip number 1 and then clip number 2. And I'm going to ask you to reflect on what was different about how each of the trees responded in these storms, and what do you think made the trees respond so differently? So first, we will go to clip 1. Okay, now clip 2. Okay, so what I would like is you could put in the chat box any quick reflections about what was different, and between the two clips, what was different, and why do you think the trees responded differently in the two situations? Any reflections? So clip, yeah, completely came down. That's right. The tree in the first clip completely came down and got uprooted. Now I'm seeing some comments. The trees completely came down in the first clip, and the second clip not. Now, the person, so Christina, who said it seemed like the first one had more wind, wasn't quite exactly true. It was actually that the audio quality on the two videos are a little different, but yeah, really the storms were quite similar in was the tree in one, or the trees, a couple of them completely fell and were uprooted, where wet, the tree waved around a little bit, but the tree did not get uprooted. I often think I should play those completely without sound so we don't get distracted by the sound quality being better in one than the other. So the why do you think the tree in the first one became completely uprooted, whereas the second one, the tree was going through the storm without being uprooted? Any thoughts about that? Other, and it's a couple of you've mentioned about the wind, but as I said, I think that's due more to the sound quality. So other than the wind, so the second one, the first one maybe didn't bend and give as much, and stronger roots. So there could be, of course, many factors, but the two factors I'd like you to focus on for the purpose of our time together today are now mentioning. And also, though, regardless of how deep and strong your roots are, right, already saturated. In the one case, maybe there had been so many previous storms that the ground was already saturated that even if it had good and strong roots, it wouldn't be able to continue to hold. So the two things I'd like you to consider here in this, using this metaphor to think about burnout, is that the tree itself, the nature of its roots, the depth of its roots, the strength of its roots are going to help determine its level of resilience or capacity to cope with the storms of life. So that's your individual employee, and how through their own life work and the work-life balance you can help provide them and support within the workplace at an individual level to strengthen their own root system, their sense of support and connection and relationships and everything that strengthens their individual root system. But there's also that factor of the saturated soil. And that's where we have to look at the whole workplace culture of our workplace, but also the whole culture of our community, and look at factors like, as we said now, the pandemic, among others, that are saturating the soil and making people more vulnerable, even if they have good, strong systems of their own, even if they have good root systems and resilience of their own. If they're just dealing with this continuously saturated soil, that's going to cause problems. So we have to, both at once, we have to pay attention to individual supports that people can get to resist, prevent, and cope with burnout, at the same time that we have to look at the whole overall environment, both in the individual workplace and in the community, and how can we strengthen the support provided in the environment so that we won't be having the saturated soil effect. So I'm we're talking about burnout, but just so you're, thinking about it, there's a lot of terms that are very related that get used often interchangeably: burnout, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress. They each do have their own uh, specific definition, but they're all very related, and they really do have to do with the erosion of energy and motivation to do a job, empathic responses to the people we work with, feelings of loss of control, emotional exhaustion, sometimes mimicking symptoms of PTSD, and it can be very debilitating. But what I also wanted to show you is on the right-hand side of the column that going through these kind of challenges can also potentially result in strengths. It can have the opportunity to increase empathy, compassion, internal individualized resilience, but also vicarious resilience experienced by getting some satisfaction from helping others to become resilient. And then post-traumatic growth. I will show you a couple of definitions of some of these in the next couple of slides ahead. But so what we're going for here is to increase the strengths and decrease the challenges related to these issues. Now, when we look at work-related burnout, some of the key characteristics, and these are the specific ones that go in specific mental health challenge. These three keys are what we're recognizing for burnout: feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, mental distancing from job, feeling negative, being cynical, and then a sense of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. So those all kind of go hand in hand to be the characteristics of burnout. And then there have been the specific challenges since the onset of COVID has um, required virtual work to dominate our lives, just as we're even doing today, and such a thing as Zoom fatigue, which is real. And I did include an article for you in the handouts about Zoom fatigue. But people find they're working more hours. They're not having the real work-life balance off because, if you're working from pay attention to is if you're the individual hours, decide how you're going to create some boundaries and balance between work life and home life, even when they all occur in the same space and place, and take time off as needed. And if you're a manager or a supervisor, really ensuring that your employees do this, but also that you lead by example. So I did say I'd give a couple of definitions of some of the things we're really going for here. We're going for resilience. I'm going to show you two definitions of resilience. This one is kind of a more clinical type of definition. And I would like to highlight that there's a really great resource called the Resilience Alliance. And the website is Res Alliance, R-E-S alliance.org, which has many, many great tools for learning about how to build resilience in yourself or in people that you work with. But please note from this definition that it requires a drawing upon all of our resources. Now, here's another, not technically a definition, but I like to think of this as a definition of resilience. It's from the poet and rapper Tupac Shakur, and I just love the way it's written here. You have these, as I said, you have or will have these handouts. So I'm not reading to you off the screens, just wanted to give you a couple of different ways to think of resilience and what we're trying to build in order to prevent, address, and reduce burnout. And you'll see that many of the pictures that I put in with some of these slides are examples of what Tupac is talking about. Flowers growing out of concrete, plants growing out of unlikely spaces and places. And that's really kind of what we're going for to develop that resilience in ourselves and our employees. And then the other definition I wanted to share was one of post-traumatic growth. Now, whether your employees or yourself are experiencing this burnout also as secondary trauma, I still wanted you to be aware of this definition of post-traumatic growth. We often, of course, hear about post-traumatic stress, but post-traumatic growth is when we can take these really difficult life events or crises, grief, trauma that many of us and our employees have been experiencing in this past year, and can have an opportunity to have a positive transformational life experience in especially these particular areas as listed on the slide of life appreciation, deepening of relationships, seeing new possibilities in life, which was a really great example that was given in the gratitude circle when someone wrote that, this pandemic has given us a chance to think about these things. And then building your own personal and spiritual growth. Now, I'm going to just use the tree metaphor one more time. And that is that most of the time what we're looking for, someone just said my audio is sketchy. I hope it improves. Please let me know if it doesn't. But hopefully it will. What often we're looking at is not a situation where a tree has completely become uprooted or when it is completely just fine, like in the two examples that we saw, but more often when it's kind of this partially uprooted situation like the one we see here. And yet even a partially uprooted tree can be sort of a danger to itself and others. It can create barriers or hurdles that harm others, and at the same time, it cannot necessarily be at its best for itself and for receiving the nourishment of the soil around it. So we don't want to wait, in other words, until our employees or ourselves are at that completely uprooted space, but rather to be able to respond even before we get there, preferably before we become uprooted at all, but especially noticing when we're in that sort of partially uprooted situation. If someone could type in the box and just let me know if the audio is better. If not, I may have to try to see what else I can do. But I'm going to keep us moving along. I wanted to share with you what I'm going to focus on for the remainder of the time now, which is what I call the ABCs of employee burnout and self-care and reflective supervision. So we're going to just spend a few minutes on each of these, A, B, and C, in the remaining time we have. A for awareness, B for balance, and C for connection. Just an easy way of thinking about the framework, sort of, if you will, for the topic today of preventing, addressing, and managing burnout. So the A for awareness, well, what is it we want to be aware of? We need to be aware of, we need to understand and know the definitions and the warning signs, both for ourselves and for others around us, and particularly those, of course, that we may supervise. And then we also have to have an awareness of the tools and strategies that could be useful and could help. So some of the signs to be aware of in terms of burnout are listed here. And although in other instances I haven't been fully reading you every bullet on the slide, I am going to kind of work through these just quickly. If you start to see not just one of these signs, lack of interest or disinterest, disengagement, tardiness and absences, decline in productivity, if you're starting to see an increase in several of these areas, that's when you particularly are starting to see that uprooted tree situation. It may not be all the way uprooted, but it's certainly in that partially uprooted state. And that's when you really do want to pay attention. And some of the symptoms that people will demonstrate, both of burnout and STS, are often going to come in what have been defined as 3 clusters. And you'll see on the bottom of the slide, there's a reference of how symptoms often come along are in intrusion, avoidance, and hyperarousal. So intrusion is when people just keep having thoughts, reliving a client's difficult situation, or an employee just constantly can't stop thinking about it. One person who was an administrator at a nonprofit even said, she was not an administrator, but an administrative assistant. She said, my job is just to type the reports. I didn't think I was vulnerable to this, but I type the reports of what the clients are going through, and I have dreams about what I've typed. It intrudes in that way, in dreams. So that's an intrusive type of symptom. Avoidance, when people are trying to avoid maybe particular places, situations, people, or things, or have a sense of foreboding or detachment around those circumstances. And then hyperarousal, just being frequently irritable, always suspicious, difficult concentrating, easily to know. Book by Lipsky, I think is how you say her last name, but it's called Trauma Stewardship, and she gives a lot of great examples of these as well. Now, these impacts affect people across multiple life domains. So we're going to do another poll now, and this one has multiple questions. So you're going to see, and I'm launching the poll now, and you're going to see that there's actually a total of 6 questions here, each that are just a pretty easy true or false, or 2 possible answers. But go down and answer all 6 of them as part of this one poll. So I will just quickly read them out loud, hoping that you can hear them even if you can't see them. When facing high stress situations, I lean more towards spaciness and diminished concentration, or rigidity and perfection. So that would be one example. Another one would be shutting down and numbness, or intense emotional roller coaster. The third one is the dichotomy between eating more often or less healthy versus no appetite or not eating. The fourth one is questioning my faith and beliefs versus the clinging to my faith and beliefs. And the next one is being isolating and withdrawing versus projecting anger or blame onto others. And then a true or false that I have more aches and pains and physical symptoms. I do or I don't. So we've gotten about 3/4 of you have replied. I'm going to leave it up a few more seconds. And I will close this out in just a couple of seconds, even though there's still about maybe 10 of you that didn't get to reply. If you can't reply in the poll itself, please feel free to put a comment in the chat box. All right, we have over 80% of you now, so I'm going to go ahead and look at the answers. And the answers are as I expect and as I often see is that a couple of the questions, whereas others are a little more, 70-30, seems to be the broadest difference in the splits. But in other words, it's very normal for people to have one or the other, or sometimes even kind of a continuum between, but that when facing high stress situations, it affects us in all of these life domains. And so one thing in the A for awareness is being aware of ourselves as well as people we might supervise, in when we start to see these signs or symptoms, that's a warning to sign and a time to take some stock and do some stuff. So I'll stop that poll. And then just a few other ways that burnout impacts employees in our field. In fields that many of us are in, both at the personal level, but also that we just looked at, but also at the professional level. So you can see it affects performance and critical thinking and judgment and capacity to really serve clients. I see that again, someone said audio is unstable. So I don't know what's happening, but hope we can keep going. And just keep going. Let me know if the problem gets worse. And I'll give you these few tools that you can use in your tools to do self-assessment or assessment you can do with getting to burnout. What sort of help or support do I need in my life situation? So with that awareness piece. Now we're going to move on to the balance part. So if we're developing balance, what do I mean by balance? Well, I do have another poll to help us think about that. So and this is just one example, but my employees, and this is a multiple choice. So you can select as many of these as might be true for you and your employees. Over 50% of the day is on computer or other screen applications. When in virtual meetings, camera is on or expectation is on most of the time. When I or my employees are in virtual meetings, there's a break at least once an hour. And since COVID began, we are scheduling more work-related meetings after normal business hours. Okay, we've got about 2/3 of you in here. I'm going to wait for a few more before I close it out. Okay, now that we've gotten at least 75% of you responding, I think I will close it out and share the results. So look at that. How many of you are on computers or screens 50% or more of the day? Breaks at least once an hour. So look at that sort of spread of those examples and think about that as we talk about balance. Individual balance and people being able to have support for that whole work-life boundaries and balance. Balance in the workplace with the workload and types of tasks. So if you're an individual employee, talk to your supervisor about being able to vary your workload and your tasks. If you're a supervisor or administrator, really important to be able to give that opportunity to your workers to prevent burnout. Balancing approaches to communication, not everything having to be on video. Again, that Zoom burnout thing is real. And then balance debriefing and learning from both difficult but also from successful experiences. Too often we only do debriefings when it's about a problem, but we also need to learn from success. Now we're going to take one more of those 30-second circles. So when I say the 30 seconds begin, close your eyes if you wish and concentrate on one of your tool for reflection. That 30 seconds will begin now. And now it ends. Take a last breath. And if you have any reflection you'd like to make about this experience, again, of having that just little 30-second break, to be reflective, to be intentional, to focus on one of your strengths, I would welcome any reflection anyone would like to offer. Asking for help is a really great strength and one that not everyone has. So thank you for sharing that. Any others? Reflections? Okay, and again, if someone can let me know if the audio is okay now for these last 15 minutes, I hope it'll hold up. I want to share a little bit about some questions if you're a supervisor or a manager that you can ask yourself to think about, are you creating an environment that that provides the balance people need in order to support their prevention and management of burnout. So some questions around communication. Are you regularly communicating with people about availability of preventive care and other kinds of options in terms of intervention that will help them if they are feeling stressed or burnt out? Are you able to identify the signs, both in person and over video or in virtual world when people are experiencing symptoms of burnout? Are you providing connections for your workers to not only benefits that you're able to offer in regard to work-life balance, mental health support, and other kinds of resources, but also resources in the community? Are you able to offer options? There's some great apps, but we shouldn't limit to apps. Do we have community-based options and clinical-based options that we're able to offer to employees that are struggling or ourselves when we're struggling? And do we pay attention to culture? Do we offer options that are culturally sensitive, culturally informed, that are diverse, and allow the possibility of non-traditional options? So these are some questions as you think about that balance. Another way to think about it is the making sure that everybody has opportunities to have balance in their use of time across both work and life, and kind of having this be a topic of conversation for supervision, as well as are people getting opportunities to kind of balance their whole body? Are they having indoor time as well as outdoor time, time alone as well as time with others? And you might wonder what the 20-20-20 rule is, and that's especially for this issue of having too much screen time. The rule is after every 20 minutes of screen time, give yourself at least a 20-second break, like those 30-second ones I've been building in here, where you stand up, move your body a little bit, and where you look away from the screen and look at something at least 20 feet away. So after 20 minutes, take 20 seconds and look at something 20 feet away. It helps your eyes, it helps your brain, it helps you build resilience and not to be likely to burn out. So find your own and help your employees to find their own stress busters that they can utilize in all these different domains of life. Now, when you are debriefing difficult situations that have occurred either with a client or in the workplace or just in the world that have happened and you want to give a debriefing space, here's some questions you can use to guide those difficult debriefings. You want to help people understand, how are they thinking and feeling? Um, and then how's that affecting their behavior? And then what helps? So these are just some real basic but good questions you can use either for yourself in your own journaling, for a one-on-one conversation with another person, or if you're a supervisor in a supervisory session or even in a group session to guide a debriefing about a difficult situation. But like I said before, we also want to be able to recognize success. So I'm going to just introduce to you this tool called the Critical Success Analysis. I have a poll for that. So let's see, just this poll just gauges, if this is something you already know about. But a critical success analysis with your team takes their mind off the times they've failed, strengthens resiliency factors by promoting a strengths-based mindset, increases unhealthy competition between team members, or can be traumatizing for some who have not experienced success. Okay, we've had just over half of you reply, so I'm going to just give it a few more seconds. All right. I will close it out now and show you that, yes, the majority of you did know that it is a tool that strengthens resiliency factors. So that's why I want to introduce it to you today. So what you do for a critical success analysis, it's really a group process. So have your team, a group, a lunch group, a set of peers, however you do that, identify a shared experience of success, and then make a timeline. What started that success? What got us there? And then use Post-it notes, or if you're on a virtual, there's different tools you can use, whiteboards and things, even in virtual, to kind of identify the factors that led to success, even the smallest ones. Then kind of put those notes along the timeline so you can see the progress in the process. So then you can determine, what made the success. And so that's where you use the questions on the next page here, which are these. How did each of those little Post-it note items contribute to the overall success? And what assumptions did we make that led to success? And you can see some examples here that help you have that conversation. And then, of course, what lessons can we take from this that we can replicate to have more successes? Analyzing, recognizing, acknowledging, learn, invigorated, motivated in the workplace, and then to also have prevention or dealing with coping with and managing burnout. So this is one of the best tools that you can use, and I hope that you will try it out if you haven't already. And if you've been using it, please do share some thoughts in the chat box about how you use that. Now we don't have a lot of time left, but in this little bit of remaining time, I want to come to the C around addressing burnout and STS and self-care. And so we're going to look at the C for connection and community. And as Brene Brown puts it, we're hardwired to connect with others. So connection is really critical. That feeling that I have a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, is just extremely critical to both preventing and addressing burnout. So we want to become an organization that is responsive to both burnout and STS. And in order to do that, we need to know where we are now. So here's another tool for you where you can assess not only individuals, which the last tools I shared were about, but where you can also address where you are as an organization. And then you can decide by looking at that assessment, what do we need to do to make our workplace, again, remember the saturated soil, to make it less saturated? What can we do to make our workplace a more supportive culture to address burnout? And then start using some of the reflective practices that I'm going to introduce in the next remaining few minutes. Just before I get to those reflective practices, though, we are going to take one more 30-second circle. And this time, when I say the 30 seconds begins, please, again, be intentional with your breathing and close your eyes if you like, and think about who's at least one person I can turn to for support when and if I need it. So the 30 seconds will begin now. Okay, and now you can take one final breath and come back into the group. Again, I welcome any reflections, insights, thoughts that anyone had about both what you were focusing on or just the process of taking these moments for reflection. But these are tools you can really use for yourself or for your entire workplace to help address and reduce burnout. So two last tools I want to introduce before our time ends, and one is about appreciative inquiry. I'm going to skip the last poll just because we're getting close to the end of time. But appreciative inquiry is a tool that has evidence that it can reduce the impact of burnout and STS. It can reduce staff turnover. It can increase a sense of group identity and culture that contributes to a sense of belonging, hence it's under the C for connection. It can also improve leadership development in our work environment, and also supports the desired outcomes we have within our agency mission. So tells us what it is, but the key factor here is that it's both intentional and it's about seeking the best not only in people, but the organization and the broader community. So it utilizes questions that really help to do that. And I'm just going to show you a few examples of the types of questions that are utilized in appreciative inquiry. So you want to talk about, yes, there are some hard parts, some problems, some difficulties, some challenges, but what you want to do is keep going with the question and say, and then how did you still make progress? Or how did you keep going? Or what are you proudest about? And it's when you add that phrase, that clause to the question, we're doing appreciative inquiry and we're building resilience and strength, not just leaving it kind of stuck in, oh, here's where I was stuck, or here's where I had a problem, or where I went through something hard. So that's a great tool. Of course, this isn't a whole workshop on that, and you can learn much more about it. But I wanted to introduce it. And likewise, I also wanted to introduce reflective supervision, a form of supervising that involves a reflective process between the supervisor and the supervisee. You'll see some words here highlighted, in particular that it's got to be regular and it's purposeful. So it's a regular process that is purposeful. And it's built on 3 building blocks of reflection, collaboration, and regularity. We have to have reflective opportunities, and you'll see there's a couple of slides I have at the end of the PowerPoint that I'm not actually going through in my verbal presentation, but that you will have as resources that identify a little bit more about what each of these 3 building blocks are, but to have regular times for reflection and collaborative problem solving. And that we also want to be able to set boundaries. Now, remember at the very beginning, I said the lack of capacity for boundary setting is often part of the reason why burnout happens in the first place. And Brene Brown has a way of introducing the concept of setting boundaries as being part of being able to show compassion for others. That's having boundaries is not where you're turning people down or saying no all the time, but it is a way to be able to be generous with your compassion because you maintain your own integrity. So you can see that flow there, that having boundaries leads to integrity, which allows you to be generous with your compassion. And so she says more about that. This is what it looks like if you look it up on Google, the video with Brene Brown talking about boundaries, where you can learn a little more about that. And I want to allow a couple of seconds here for some closing questions. Circle. I'm going to encourage you to do it as kind of your homework at the end when we're done today. Take that 30-second pause, or some other time later in the day when you need a little 30-second break, and practice this this strategy that we've been using throughout our time together, so that you can just focus on something to look forward to. So the circles we did was one on gratitude, one on strengths and talents, one on who supports you, and one on optimism and hope. That's what this one is about, having optimism and hope. And those are 4 of the major building blocks of resilience that really help support the prevention and the recovery from burnout in the workplace and in the home life. So that's the note I'm going to end on. Like I said, you'll see when you look at the handout packet of the PowerPoints that there are a couple of additional slides that kind of break down those building blocks of reflective supervision, so you get a little more on that. And there are a few other handouts as well that are some articles about burnout and about helping address that and overcome that in the workplace. But we're down to only a couple of minutes left, and I did want to make sure that we had a few minutes for any questions that you might have. So so I will take a couple questions now if there are any. I don't see any yet in the chat box, but feel free to post them if you have them. And I'll put my camera back on so you can see me for these last few seconds. Any comments or questions? And I can turn it back over to our facilitators. Dana, I think it might be you. That's
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. Vivian is going to be sending out packets to everyone who attended today, and it has been recorded, so that should be accessible as well. Thank you, Sue, so much for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you for helping us remember to breathe throughout the day and make it through this time. So we appreciate it, and thank you to everyone for attending.
Great. I hope you all